Chapter 31. Sean opened his eyes just in time to see a booted heel coming down on his face. He rolled out of the way and onto his feet. Dizziness threatened to take him back down, and he clung onto the van for support. His attacker he recognized immediately. He wore a leather biker's jacket and a helmet. There was no mistaking the eyes that glared through the visor. "Malcolm, what are you doing here?" "I never trusted you," Malcolm stated flatly. "The day of your test, you shut a door in my face twice, so I followed you." "And now?" For an answer, Malcolm pulled a Glock from inside his bike jacket. He cocked it as he walked right up to Sean and placed the muzzle against his head. "Whoa!" Sean shouted. He staggered back, hands held high. "You can't just slot me in broad daylight. Witnesses!" He looked desperately at the fit woman. She was on her phone now, unaware that anything was going on. Malcolm glanced around. And what will the witnesses see? A vigilante hero whom they can't identify stopping a bomber? Sean went for the gun. He knew the next move. It had worked on that loan shark Ricky like a textbook exercise. Malcolm hadn't read the textbook. He simply tightened his grip on the pistol, and it remained glued to his hand even though Sean strained at it. Then, slowly, he began to bend Sean's arm back. Sean redoubled his efforts, both hands trying to keep the gun hand away. The Doberman started to move forward, and Sean was being pushed back into the van. The nearest tub dug in below his shoulder blades, and he felt himself bending backwards further and further. They stared into each other's eyes over a distance of inches. Malcolm's were emotionless, showing as much interest as Sean might when he swatted a mosquito. Then Malcolm brought his free arm and pressed it into Sean's throat. Sean's head was pinned against the lid of the tub. He heard his breath start to gurgle under the intolerable pressure. Cut off the air to his lungs, cut off the blood to his brain. Either would work. Dark spots started to dance in front of his eyes. Through the roaring in his ears he could hear voices. "Should we call the police? Oh my God, I think he's killing him." The witnesses, who hadn't bothered Malcolm, were hanging back, not quite daring to intervene. Sean was too weak to keep both hands on the gun now. His right hand slipped off, so he used it to try and lever Malcolm's visor open, claw at those cold, dead eyes. Malcolm simply shifted his head slightly and kept pressing. Sean's arm flopped down. He just had the strength to keep pushing at something, anything, whatever he could reach, which was now Malcolm's groin. "Okay, let's really put a stop to you." He clenched his fist and punched. Malcolm trembled and grunted, and the pressure on Sean's throat eased slightly, just enough to let him take in a huge wheezing breath, but he kept squeezing. Malcolm's jaw clenched, and shudders ran through his body. Sean punched again and again. Malcolm's shudders grew worse, and suddenly he let go of Sean's neck altogether, which meant that Sean could get a proper grip. He yanked down as hard as he possibly could. Malcolm screamed and doubled over. Sean grabbed at the Glock and successfully twisted it out of Malcolm's hands. Before Malcolm could straighten up, he kicked as hard as he could against the side of his helmet. Malcolm staggered backwards, and Sean straightened up, holding the gun in the approved manner, both hands on the grip, arms straight, feet apart, looking straight over the sights at his attacker. "Stay down, Malcolm, or—" And then there was a knife in Malcolm's hand, and he was running at Sean with an animal howl. Sean fired, twice, the gun jumping in his hand. Red flowers blossomed in Malcolm's chest, and he crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut, dead before he even hit the ground. People screamed, and Sean was dimly aware of a rapidly clearing area around him as the witnesses fled the killer with the gun. Well, that was one way to do it. For a moment he looked at the body of the first man he had ever killed in cold blood. Then he coughed and rubbed his throat, trying to get his breathing back to normal. He picked up the phone. "Still there?" He tried to make his voice sound normal, but he knew it was shaking. What he had just done, there was no way of making it cool or clever like on TV. It had been a matter of survival. It could just as well have been him lying there dead. "Still here," Fitz's voice was a little less dispassionate than before. Presumably everyone had been watching the show via the drone. "Did you twist the wires together?" "Yup." "Then cut one of the wires between detonator and shunt." Sean put down the gun, picked up the penknife. "Doing it now." He put the blade to the wire and paused. Was this it? What nearly 18 years of mostly wasted life came down to? And just when he had started to make good, again. He cut the wire as directed. Adrenaline surged through his body as it realized that he was still alive. He threw back his head and yelled, "Oh, fuck, yeah!" Then he sagged against the tubs. Adams was back on the line. "Excellent, well done." "Sheer fucking A," Sean shouted in agreement. "No fucking Z. Our friends raided the warehouse and found evidence of 5 bombs having been made." Sean felt all the energy drain out of him, leaving him with his battered mind and body. "So where's the 5th? "Exactly." "Oh, shit." Sean sagged against the van. But there were only 4 drivers. And Malcolm's here, so that just leaves..." Maybe he actually wants to get his hands dirty for once. Press the button on his own pet project. A pause while Adam spoke to someone away from the phone. "The other vans all seem to be headed for destinations around the city, so that's where they'll concentrate their search. But it's not your problem, Harker." Adams was back to his normal self, a sergeant addressing a private. "If it blows, it blows. You've done your bit. You need to stay there until the cops and the bomb squad arrive. Can't leave that thing unattended. And right now, the police are responding to calls from the public about a lunatic with a van and a gun. So put it away and wait with your hands on your head. You're standing over a dead body, so don't give the Met's finest the slightest excuse to plug you, because it's all they'll need. Just let them nick you, don't say a word, and we'll come and get you." Sean breathed out heavily. "Sure, no probs." He wasn't going to argue about the injustice of getting nicked for being a hero. He stuffed the gun into his trousers, aware that he was aiming a weapon directly at his balls, really hoping that his instructors were right when they said that a Glock was knock-proof and would only ever fire if you actually pulled the trigger, hence no safety catch. Then he plonked his ass down on the rear step of the van, linked his fingers on top of his head, and waited. The sound of sirens tickled his ears. They'd take a while to get through. Well, he had all the time in the world. He stared at the rows of empty cars in front of him, glanced down at Malcolm's body, and quickly looked away again. "Yeah, you're welcome," he said to the sports car belonging to the fit woman. Fuck that 5th bomb. Something clattered next to him and he jumped. His senses still hadn't quite come down from their high alert. He quickly checked the bomb. Nothing had changed. No, something had. A small plastic rectangle lay on the floor of the van beside him. He picked it up and found that he was holding the display from the black box. Eh? He peered closely at the box. There was a glistening rectangle where the display had been stuck. He looked at it again, and his heart thudded. It was just a display of some pocket calculator stuck onto the box. It had nothing to do with what was in the box at all. "Fuck!" he bellowed and grabbed the phone. Fitz answered even before it started ringing. "What? What's the matter?" "It's fucking fake, that's what!" Sean trailed off, then leaned forward and peered between the barrels. Right at the front of the van, where he would never be able to get at without moving everything else, just behind the bulkhead, inches from where he had been sitting as he drove, there's another timer. And, it hit him in the guts like a blow, it's set to 10 minutes early. Oh, 6:50. What's the time now? Suddenly he didn't want to look at his watch, and now he knew that Rich had never planned for any of the drivers to survive. They were all meant to die. Didn't matter if they hadn't quite made their destinations. They would still be surrounded by traffic. It would still be carnage. The press would call them suicide bombers. which would just strengthen the alleged link with IS. It was brilliant. It was brutal. And it was only minutes away. "Get out," Fitz snapped. "Get out of there now!" Sean was already running, weaving between the abandoned cars. What else had Fitz said back in that lecture? It was nagging at him. Something else about the Omar bomb. Deaths were mostly caused by the supersonic shockwave of the blast and the distribution of shrapnel. Shit. He couldn't outrun either of those. But he could shelter. There had to be a good 10 cars between him and the van now. He flung himself to the ground behind a Volvo estate, skidding on his front on the rough tarmac just as the sky seemed to split open and a deep roaring boom shook every cell in his body. He lay there dazed, confused, as dust and debris came raining down. Somehow he knew that his body was in tremendous pain. It told him this, but it wasn't letting him feel it. All the noise, car alarms, screams, a torrent of horror and confusion was parked a safe distance away too, where his brain could register it but didn't have to listen. He coughed as pain and noise slowly came back to their normal levels. His fingers brushed against bits of glass, shattered into tiny diamonds. Slowly he pushed himself onto his hands and knees and looked back. The van was a dark skeleton, consumed by flame, belching thick black smoke. The vehicles on either side and in front and behind weren't much better. Others further down the road were slight improvements. They were only write-offs. Sean dragged himself to his feet, leaning against the Volvo. His body felt like one big bruise. The sirens were nearer. The emergency services would be here soon. Cool. They could deal with it. But first, he could report in. He felt for the spook's phone. It rattled. He held it up to his head and shook it. Definitely rattling. Plus, the screen was starred and cracked. It was in worse shape than he was. He wouldn't be making any more calls on that. "Okay," he said out loud. There was still the wire. "This is Harker. Checking in. Hope you're getting this." He felt for the button that was the wire's microphone, and something gave beneath his fingers. He stared down at it in horror. The plastic was smashed. As he watched, the button fell off and he felt the loose wire tickle against his skin inside his shirt. Oh, crap. Wondering what to do, he got out his own phone, which seemed to be undamaged. But with the other phone out of action, he realized he no longer had the number he needed. He put his hands up on his head again as he thought. The Met would be in an even worse mood now that one of the bombs had gone off. He leaned against the Volvo and sighed. Was it just the one bomb, he wondered? He didn't know. Maybe they had got to bombs 2, 3, and 4 in time. But there was still that fucking 5th bomb. Fuck Rich. He might have known. Nothing was simple. Not in the head of someone like that. He remembered that meeting in London. The signs had been there. The way it took just a few words for Rich to morph from calm and collected to twisted crackpot. This place stands for everything that's wrong with this country. Sean stared into the distance. That had to be it. It just had to be. Trafalgar Sodding Square. Unless Trafalgar Square was already one of the locations, but Adams had said that it looked like everyone was heading for the city, the financial district, the Bank of England, Lloyd's, rich multinationals. It meant that at some point they had all turned northwards to cross the river, probably at Tower Bridge or London Bridge. Trafalgar Square was west of all that. And if Sean was heading to Trafalgar Square from Peckham, then that was the direction he would head. He would cross the Thames at Westminster Bridge or Waterloo. So Trafalgar Square had not been the destination of any of the others. It had to be Rich's target. Sean looked at his phone again. How was he going to report this? He thought of just dialing 999. But would anyone take him seriously? They certainly wouldn't put him through to the spooks. No. He had to get to Trafalgar Square himself. He stuffed the phone in his pocket and began to run from car to car, checking doors, looking for one that still had keys in. But he squinted back up the road. None of these cars would be going anywhere. Shit! He needed something that could get through this jam. A bike. Malcolm had been wearing bike leathers. Sean ran back to the wreckage of the van, which was still blazing away. He hadn't noticed the bike, but he remembered hearing it. And there it was, lying on its side 2 cars away from the van. The cars had taken the force of the blast and the bike was still intact. A Yamaha Phaser FZ1, smooth black metal lines wrapped around a 998cc engine. It was the one he had seen outside the warehouse. He laughed, remembering the Kawasaki Ninja that had got him into all this trouble in the first place, the night he was caught by the police. Perhaps this one would actually get him out of trouble. He picked up the bike and found the key still in the ignition. He turned it as he swung himself into the saddle, and the engine shuddered into life. It throbbed impatiently as Sean weaved his way between abandoned vehicles, until at last he was clear and the road ahead was empty. He leaned forward, throttled up, and the bike surged forward. Now all he had to do was remember the way. He pulled left onto the A2, leaning over so that his knee almost brushed the ground. The bike raged and roared beneath him as he hurled it westwards, the opposite way to the route he'd been taking to the Blackwall Tunnel. Traffic crawled along. He hurled himself between gaps and through spaces that looked like they wouldn't have taken a moped. Somehow the cars managed to get out of the way. Did they still have the drone on him? He hoped so. They might guess where he was going and get there first, or maybe give orders to any cops to keep out of his way. Trafalgar Square. Trafalgar Square. If he thought it hard enough, would they work it out? Through Elephant and Castle, running the red lights, hurtling round the roundabout, cutting off any cars that even thought about having right away. By now the cops must have been alerted. Maniac on a Yamaha, heading west. But what are they going to do? They would never catch him in a car. And if any bike cops gave chase, well, the more the merrier. He would lead them to Rich. He pointed the bike up towards Lambeth and almost hit the brakes as he rode slap bang into roadworks blocking the way. With a spin of the rear wheel out to his right, Sean heaved the bike out of the road and onto the pavement. He forced himself to slow down just enough to allow pedestrians to throw themselves out of the way. Most of them had sense to do just that. Some tried to knock him off, but by the time they'd reached for him, he was already gone. Past the back end of Waterloo, and on to Westminster Bridge, the Houses of Parliament gleaming in the early daylight on the far bank. The Big Ben clock said it was just coming up to 7:30. He took the interchange into Whitehall, completely the wrong way, cutting straight across the right turn rather than politely going all the way round Parliament Square. And there was Trafalgar Square. Nelson's column, marking the spot at the far end of Whitehall. Sean blazed up the final stretch, past grand, austere government buildings, and the rest of the square slowly came into view. There was no sign of emergency vehicles, which was good and bad. Good, because if the 5th bomb was here, it hadn't gone off yet. Bad, because his unseen watchers hadn't guessed where he was heading. He was on his own. He went across the junction at the end, taking the direct route almost to the base of Nelson's column. With a dramatic skid that wasn't exactly planned, he pulled the bike up and was off it in a single movement, scanning the area. It was 7:30 in the morning. The only people around were the ones walking to work. Nothing like as packed as it had been when he was here with Rich. Of course, no one was getting involved. Sean got some sideways looks, but that was all. But they were still there. If a bomb like the one in the van went off right now, it would take 40, 50 people with it. The blast and the shrapnel cutting right across the open space like a giant blade. If it was here. Sean couldn't see any stationary vans. He leaped onto the base of Nelson's column, clambering up to the topmost ledge, eyes scanning all around for any sign. Where? A ringing sound caught Sean's attention, though at first he didn't register what it was. Then he recognised the tune. It was his phone. He put it to his ear. Had Adams tracked him down, he wondered? He pulled it out. Yep. Hello, Sean. It was the same synthesized voice that had given the instructions on the CDs. Don't do it, Sean yelled. These are innocent people. There was a pause. Wherever he was, Rich must be inputting the words in real time. There is no such thing as innocent people, the voice said flatly. Another pause. "You know about the fifth bomb, and you are alive. Therefore, you have betrayed me." "It's over," Sean said. It was all he could think of. "Give up." "The bomb was set for later in the day, when the square is busier." Pause. "Perhaps I should set it off now. What do you think?" Sean looked around frantically. "Where are you?" "They do not teach observation in the army, then?" "Eh?" "How many homeless people have you ever seen with an iPad?" "What?" Sean scanned the square again, and then he had it. Sitting at the bottom of the grand flight of stone steps leading up to the National Gallery, an old tramp, baggy hat pulled down over his face, long, shapeless coat. Nothing that could be picked up off CCTV tapes. He could probably ditch the outfit in seconds and become the well-dressed white guy no one paid any attention to. And he had one hand tucked inside his coat. The other held the coat slightly open, just enough for him to peer in and see what he was doing. The man glanced up at Sean from under the brim of his hat and pulled the coat open a fraction of an inch. Sean just had a moment to catch the light of a screen before it disappeared again. The robot voice continued. "I'm going to turn and walk away. Once I'm safely sheltered, I will detonate the bomb. You can come and get me. You can run for shelter. Or you can stay and find the bomb. Your choice." Without looking back, the tramp stood up and shuffled off. He was 200 meters away. Sean would never catch him in time. And at this range, he would never get him with the Glock. He swore loudly and scanned the area again in desperation, looking for a clue, any clue. Then he realized that it was literally right in front of him. The fake vintage van coffee stand surrounded by metal chairs. It had been moved to the right, in front of the column. A perfect place to cause as much damage as possible. Sean ran over and tugged at the door. It was locked. He went round to the front. The shutter was down, the whole thing sealed off, and it was easily big enough to carry the same kind of load as he'd had in the transit. This had to be it. "There's a bomb!" Sean shouted. He waved his hands frantically. "There's a bomb! Get away!" All he got was some odd looks. Fuck! What did it take? Last time he'd had to shoot a guy. Inspiration struck. Sean pulled out the Glock, cocked it, waved it above his head. "Run! Now! There's a bomb!" A few bystanders shuffled into something a little more urgent, but no one was really shifting. He was going to have to fire the thing. That was what had got them going before. Fire it where? He couldn't loose off rounds in a crowded city and not hit someone, not even into the air. They would come down somewhere. The only thing he could think of that would absorb the shots was a coffee stand, and he wasn't going to fire at something that might explode. And then he had it. He ran over to one of the fountains, leaped up onto the balustrade, and fired 2 shots into the water. "Bomb! Bomb!" He fired again. Now people were moving. They began to scatter, slowly at first, then faster and faster, screaming as the panic spread. Sean fired again, and he ran over to the other fountain and repeated the performance. Everyone fled, shrieking as he approached. The square was finally clearing. Would that stop Rich blowing it? He couldn't risk it. Rich was only giving him this chance to toy with him. Give him the impossible choice of trying to save people or saving his own skin. He would want to make whatever grand final gesture he could, his way of saying, "Fuck you all." Meanwhile, Sean was now a target for any Met officer with a gun of his own. This close to Whitehall and Downing Street, there'd be plenty of them around. Well, I'm a soldier. We lay down our lives if we have to. He fancied he could already feel the laser sights dancing on his chest, on his back, anywhere. But he fired until the gun was empty. The area was clear. There was nothing more that he could do. How long had that all taken? 30 seconds? A minute? He had to be out of time. His shoulders sagged as he looked around. The edges of the square seemed to recede as the empty space grew bigger. He had to get across it, out of the bomb's range. Oh, fucking hell, couldn't he just lie down and rest? He sighed and started to run. Met marksman or bomb blast, one of them would probably get him, but he was fucked if he was just going to lie down and take it. The world lit up.